All right, so I think most of you all have joined us in the first workshop, and if you did not, welcome and thanks for coming. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. We are recording this session, and like I said before, we are going to keep the chat. We encourage you to, we want to learn about what your organization's priorities and current activities are in this discussion. So please share. It really helps us as we move forward. Use the chats if you can't find the space or the timing to speak up. And we're going to get started. My name is Breanne Fisher. I'm the Climate Action Manager for the City of Tempe, working with Dr. Braden Kay. I've been with the City of Tempe for 4 years. I was previously in the mayor's office, and of this year, starting in January, I started my role as Climate Action Manager, and I'm loving it. So I am helping facilitate today's workshop. So if you have any questions or any concerns, feel free to chat me. I also have my contact information that will be provided at the end of these slides. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So just as an overview and a reminder to folks who may not have been here on the first workshop, or it was a month ago. So just a refresh of why are we here? Why are we gathering? Why are we putting on this workshop series? And it's truly because of the opportunity that the federal funding could bring to our region. We know from the federal government that there is going to be a large emphasis on a regional requirement to collaborate. And so this is a good opportunity to flex our muscles and to organize for long-term collaboration. We can organize around infrastructure, climate resilience infrastructure. That's important to everyone. And as I said, using the opportunity of the federal funding is a good way to flex our muscle for long-term planning initiatives. You see on the slide 2 cities, San Diego and Annapolis. They are both a little more mature in this space where they have fairly formal organizational structures for this purpose, for collaborating on regional climate infrastructure, resilience infrastructure priorities. And so as we gather through this grant incubator, this workshop series, the primary focus is to see where we can have some joint applications, where we can have some joint grants. But the longer term goal is around this discussion of what could this look like for our region, for our long-lasting region. How can we organize ourselves in a way where we are ready and prepared for the next funding cycle that comes through, where we have a list of our priorities, we know where the capacity's at. So keep that longer term goal in mind. But for right now, as we go through this series, again, this is workshop number 2 out of about 6. And think of it as a grant incubator. Think of it as us all coming together. Who are we missing? Who do we need at the table? And where are we going to flex our muscles in this immediate way to bring some resources to us? And for now, again, this is just part of the overview. I'm going to flip it on over to Catherine, who's going to help provide a bit of an overview of the Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act. I'm sure we are all very familiar, have been diving into it. She's going to provide just a bit of an overview with the next couple of slides.
Hey all, I'm Catherine Gajewski. I've been supporting this project as a consultant, and as part of my work, I've been scanning through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, looking at the programs and helping to start to identify funding programs that match priorities in the region. And so a quick kind of recap of what we discussed in the first workshop earlier this month. We looked through the entire funding platform and identified about a couple of dozen programs that are really targeting regional collaboration and multi-municipality, multi-sector partnership joint applications. And a lot of those intersect with key priorities that got voiced both in the first workshop and then in other forums that you all and others are a part of. So what we're starting to do is kind of following the conversation and following the energy, starting to narrow a little bit more, as Brianne said, towards identifying some potentially really specific grants and really specific regional projects that feel like married together might bring about some awesome work in the region. So we shared just a couple of the programs that we're starting to identify. This is just a snapshot of what was a larger matrix table that we shared that I'll put in chat in just a minute. If you want to go forward, Brianne. So in other projects that I work on, I spend a good amount of time interfacing with federal agencies and White House officials, and both publicly and in kind of more private conversations, they're signaling very clearly that there's the recognized constraints around just how much of the infrastructure funding is formula in nature and will go to states and be at the discretion of states to program out. But where there are grant programs, the federal agencies are really looking, they're writing kind of the rules and guidelines right now. And we know that they're signaling an interest in projects that advance climate, equity, regional collaboration, community partnerships, which many agencies are updating their definitions of, and labor agreements and workforce development partnerships. So these are really kind of clear and consistent signals that are being sent by the federal government and agency partners around the kind of innovation that they're looking to create room for in the grant programs that will be available for local government and local government partnerships to go after. So stuff is starting to roll. So announcements are starting to kind of come out on a nearly weekly basis. And the biggie since our first workshop earlier this month is from the Department of Transportation. And I'll put a link here in the chat if you want to see more details. But the Department of Transportation announced $2.9 billion in funding for large infrastructure projects through these three programs. I believe the MEGA program and the rural program are new to the bipartisan infrastructure law, and the infra program, I believe, is pre-existing. And they've done something new and different here with these three programs to reduce the burden on applicants. There is a single NOFO. So you can kind of like the Common College application. You can put in one application and apply for 1, 2, or 3 of the programs through a single application. So some indication that the federal government, is hearing local government and the feedback after ARPA, et cetera, that we need to reduce kind of the burden to entry, and then also expressing an eagerness to really begin getting the funding out and getting projects going. So this deadline is coming up quickly in May, May 23rd, 11:59 Eastern. So if this is something that's interesting, wanted to put it on the radar. Also some news from the Department of the Interior with some programs that are of interest coming out of the Department of Interior. So they've been putting out guidance around water and drought resilience programs. This is where the Department of Interior is managing some of the programs that are going to be relevant to the conversation we're having today around ecosystem management and restoration. So a lot of that funding is coming out of the Department of the Interior, and they're starting to also release blueprints and other guidance to give us a sense of what they're going to be looking for with the competitive discretionary grant programs that they're in charge of administering.
So, as we are working towards our collective priorities and trying to identify that, we know that new guidance, new information is constantly coming out, but we don't think that that is a reason to rush anything. We're going to continue to have guidance come out, and really this is these workshops and this grant incubator series is opportunity to explore, and that's what you see on this slide right here. So we have a really good understanding of the funding programs that are requesting the regional collaboration. Catherine said she would put that link into the chat. We have a good understanding of some of the existing areas of regional collaboration. We're going to be going over that today. So where is the Greater Phoenix area already doing some of this regional work? And what we want to focus on today is the ability to scale. So some of those criteria or those signals that Catherine mentioned, that's really what we want to understand. These workshops are looking at the intersection and the nexus of all three of these things. And like I said, today we have Rio Reimagined with us. They're going to provide a bit of an overview of that top sphere, the existing regional collaboration. We know not all of you on the call today are directly related, but I think that that's a good thing. And I challenge this group to think through, if you're not directly related or adjacent to the Salt River, how can your organization get involved? Where is there an opportunity to scale this kind of work and meet the needs that you see in your community? So as they go through their presentation, think through what your organization has going on that is related to this. The IIJA program FIT is the Ecosystem Restoration Funding Program. And so, do you have master planning and design priorities that relate to this? Any existing and future projects? What are some potential partnerships that are creative and innovative that you have not thought of yet? So that's really what we want to focus the discussion afterwards about. And then for now, I will turn it over to Melissa and Cecilia, and I'm going to just take a second to pull up their slides, and then they can introduce themselves and get started.
Thank you, Brianne. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. My name is Melissa McCann. I'm the director at ASU University City Exchange. I'm joined by my colleague, Cecilia Riviere, who's the assistant director here at University City Exchange. Many of you have heard or participated in Rio partnership meetings to date. So our hope is that we will give you a high-level briefing and then focus in on the aspects of ecosystem restoration, et cetera, within IIJA and other potential inputs to think about as part of the Rio. So next slide. Yep. Oops. Thank you. So the project spans 55 miles along the Saltila River corridor. It is made up of 6 cities and 2 Native American communities, the county and SRP, who are all stakeholders in a statement of intent that guides the river improvements. And as far as that group, it's quite diverse in terms of also their members of community and their aspects. I want to point out that it's not just the river corridor that we're working in. We have a planning area that extends 2 miles north and south of Top of Bank. So it actually includes, as part of river revitalization, it also embodies community revitalization as well. The potential of that is to think about the river corridor in an effort to reconnect within and across this green braid that sort of spans our densest population and, of course, rapidly expanding population within Arizona. So again, the partnership that has been built to date spans beyond just the public engagement that has been done. It also includes the private sector, nonprofit sector, academic, and community and neighborhood groups to date. We continue to work and expand across that body. We also have priority projects that are both existing, those that are designed and paused, or those that are new, and include key interaction with federal partners, including the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, Department of Interior, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. In addition, we also have many interests by communities in terms of diverse priorities. So health, water conservation and hydrology, stormwater infrastructure, public access, environmental justice, social justice, recreation, and even cultural history and aspects of cultural identity within these communities. And so there's an opportunity to elevate a regional strategy here, an approach which thinks about how to leverage resources and larger infrastructure projects over a long term. Next slide. The aspirations that were established with the stakeholders were to reconnect the community to the river, and in so thinking about culturally aware points of engagement, public access, and also retaining and acknowledging existing legacy industries, industrial and ag, that are located along the river corridor. Establishing a metropolitan vision, so a signal that exemplifies a mutual collaboration across the region. Also catalyzing equitable economic growth and inclusion, so recognizing and empowering next generation leaders within the community, addressing threats of gentrification or even historical disadvantages, and creating a testbed or a pilot for new forms of thinking of planning. And then also to think about demonstrating sustainable planning as well. So prioritizing conservation, thinking about the corridor or the river in a different way, to be able to reconnect communities, identifying areas of water conservation, or even thinking about climate and urban resilience challenges that can be solved through thinking about this larger green infrastructure.
Melissa, could you describe like two, I guess to really bring it to life, two projects that you mentioned? There's projects that are already understood it, that what are the scope of those projects? What is the project, like sort of that's clear? And then what's the approximate dollar amount we're talking about, like investment, if that's been quantified?
Sure.
Just, yeah.
Sure, I'm going to cover that in a slide coming
great.
up. So let's move on. And then if you see something or want me to talk about something in particular, we'd be happy to answer that. So I just wanted to say that all the community leaders got together and, launched the Rio in spring of 2018. Next slide. And as part of that, then we also had unanimous support from our federal designation for the Urban Waters Federal Partnership. And the importance of this is that although it's a program that's through the Environmental Protection Agency, it also coalesces these 13 other agencies to be able to break down silos to achieve multi-jurisdictional, multi-headed, sort of multi-sector projects, and thereby allowing these agencies to work together in a common purpose around river revitalization. There's 20 national locations across the country. We were selected as the 20th in 2020. The program supports funding that is competitive only amongst the urban waters locations. It also has a network of other river revitalization locations to learn from, both that are formal locations and informal locations. It gives you direct access to liaisons from these agencies, and it creates a local Rio ambassador that is the liaison to each one of those agency personnel. And so we are currently working with our partnership on the selection of an ambassador for this particular purpose. And so next slide. So in terms of projects, we have been working on what we would determine as towards a framework of regional river corridor restoration. And so you see some of these projects outlined here, which each of the cities have actually identified as key priorities. There are more projects than are listed here, and these primarily focus on ones that are environmental projects. So in terms of the city of Mesa and Salt River Pima Maricopa, they have had a 14 mile restoration project that has been outlined for quite a while and went all the way through a design period with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to do habitat restoration for the east reach of the river. There have also been discussions with the city of Mesa about the expansion of the multi-use bike and pedestrian way. There have also been other projects that Salt River Pima Maricopa have identified for environmental restoration along the river, discussions about decommissioning the mining operations in the river and actually being able to implement economic development as well as environmental restoration. The price tags for most of the larger restoration projects, so miles of restoration, as was demonstrated through Rio Salado Habitat Restoration Area in the city of Phoenix, are hundreds of millions of dollars in restoration. So the scale of those projects typically needs to be a larger award under a program such as what we're talking about today. The Army Corps of Engineers is an agency that works on long timelines and has a very regimented way of approaching a project and permitting it. It's hope that through the IIJA or other parameters of the environmental restoration aspects of IIJA that we will see some acceleration of the work that can be done with either Army Corps of Engineers or the Department of Interior. One thing that I failed to mention earlier for the Urban Waters Program is we have two sponsoring agencies for this location. One is the EPA itself, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the other is the Department of Interior. So there is an opportunity because of the relationship and the nature and the exposure of our location actually being designated through Urban Waters, that the opportunities within this corridor actually are, I would think, to be a higher standing for IIJA grants and other grants. So the city of Tempe identified their master plan for the Tempe Town Lake as part of their improvements. They have several sub projects under that particular element of the lake. One of those is a pedestrian bike bridge at the north end of the lake across abutments, which is also an infrastructure project. It not only creates another link for active transportation networks north-south along the river, but it will provide additional utilities and support for expansion of economic growth on the north side of the river. Again, the nature and of funding for a project like that might be in the neighborhood of 50 to 100 million. So the city of Phoenix has a couple of environmental restoration projects that have been identified. One is an 11-mile stretch of restoration called the Rio Oeste project, which actually connects Tres Rios wetlands with the Rio Salado habitat restoration project already. So it's the missing gap of habitat restoration in the central section of the river. It does consider other enhancements such as a multi-purpose pedestrian bike and walkway that would be a continuation and connected to some of the other multi-use paths along the river. In addition, a second project would be the continuation or finishing phases related to Tres Rios. There are 3 phases there that are also incomplete and which are seeking funding to pursue. Those 2 projects are both Army Corps of Engineers projects. They've already gone through either full design and are awaiting implementation or funding in order to achieve that implementation. There are other projects within the city of Phoenix. There is a new bike bridge, pedestrian bike bridge that is being pursued along the 3rd Street corridor. That is pursuing raise funds now, but again, it's a much needed north-south connection along the river. And I think we would advocate for other bridges to create a more unified active transportation network and perhaps even seek to offset some of our air quality attainment goals. So another project, Gila River Indian Community has ongoing restoration along the Gila. Keep in mind that because this project is 55 miles long, it goes beyond the confluence with the Gila. And so the project is not only the Salt River, but it's also the Gila River. And as part of those connections, there is additional habitat restoration that is ongoing. Again, the river has a lot of areas of restoration that are key parts of focus. So they certainly would qualify under these grants to string a number of these projects together. City of Avondale, City of Goodyear, and City of Buckeye are all engaged in the Lower Gila River Restoration Collaborative. There is another 13 to 30 miles of considered restoration that goes beyond even the project area of the Rio Reimagined all the way down to the Gillespie Dam. That particular set of efforts have already joined up together in an MOU, and they pursue that with leadership through Arizona Game and Fish Department, the Flood Control District of Maricopa County, and also with Audubon Society. So there is an ongoing effort that's part of the Rio Reimagined in which they're contemplating river restoration under a series of plans, the El Rio river restoration guidelines, as well as the El Rio vegetation management plan for the west reach of the river. Again, that particular effort, along with a couple of irrigation districts that are out there, has the potential of, again, being hundreds of millions of dollars of restoration improvement work. The Flood Control District, I mentioned their engagement with the LGRC, the Lower Gila River Collaborative, and the restoration efforts out there. But I will also say that they have a project that they have taken through conceptual design called the El Rio Confluence Lake. That's at the essentially between the confluence with the Agua Fria and the confluence with the Gila. And it is essentially developing an impoundment structure for a lake that is the size of Tempe Town Lake to be able to provide water conservation and water delivery to several areas in the West Valley. That project also stands in the high 100 millions as a price tag, but has the added benefit of adding additional recreational access, additional habitat restoration, water conservation, and I said, delivery for some of our ag industry in the West Valley. And in addition, also contemplates ecotourism along the shores of that particular lake. So with that, you can see the columns on the right on the slide show you which of those projects have been completed to date and which are actually under proposal and could be implemented under a regional project such as this. The other thing I wanted to mention is it's not how should I say that? Let me back up. So there are a full set of federal and county lands that complement this project along the river corridor. Part of the reason that Department of Interior and EPA were interested in this, sponsoring this location, is because the Department of Interior actually actively manages lands along the river and has a mission of restoration and conservation or land management alignment that are in combination with all of the other partners for the Rio. So Bureau of Land Management, Bureau of Reclamation, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that are shown here, as well as USDA Forest Service and the National Park Service. And you see the state lands and local or county parks shown. So the aggregation of it is that we have federal partners that are working as part of the Rio Reimagined Partnership, and not only bring resources, knowledge, and depth, but also bring a high level of attention to the conservation efforts that could be part of a larger grant. Next slide. And so while we were asked to speak today and highlight environmental restoration, it's important to understand that also through our regional transportation framework, we have key elements that are adjacent to the river that are impacting or influencing other ways in which we can think about the river's success. So in terms of that, we have key transportation corridors that have come online, like the 202 South Extension, and now are contemplating the SR 30 along the north side of the river, which you see here. And the important impact of this is an opportunity through the transportation funding and building better communities to think about the efforts of mitigation or the opportunities that those transportation projects bring. One of those is environmental restoration. Another is green infrastructure and the ability to recreate wetlands or adjacent areas that support wildlife and communities, open space and recreation areas, new trailheads, new access to the river. Also addressing our hazard mitigation planning, which addresses not only heat and urban canopy, but also the opportunity to think about our air quality, thinking about our wildfire risk, which actually the river corridor is a key element and strategy of that plan. And then also thinking about active transportation system, a connected greenway where the extension of all those multi-use paths, pedestrian and bike, can offset transportation values that we're creating through our vehicular network. Equitable economic development, thinking about how to reclaim and activate certain aspects of the river, and also a overall watershed planning approach, which we do through regional efforts like our 208 plan, et cetera, that could actually also add an additional benefit to a transportation and environmental strategy. Next slide. And so with that, I wanted to highlight some of the grants that have already been received or are ongoing that have actually engaged many partners of the Rio. So the first would be a Brownfields Assessment Coalition grant with the cities of Phoenix, Tempe, and Avondale, looking at redevelopment of brownfield properties, again, along the river corridor. And so that can be within 2 miles of the river. Also thinking complementary to that is a revolving loan fund through the city of Phoenix and Lisk, Arizona, that allows cleanup of those brownfield sites along the river. A Urban Waters Resilient Communities grant, which has engaged CPLC and also NeuroStrategies in thinking about ways in which the river corridor can actually create reduce the stress along communities, provide quality of life and wellness. An Urban Waters Rio Reimagined Ambassador grant. I mentioned that the Urban Waters program is seeking to place an ambassador within the community. We have been serving ASU as a facilitator and convener and quasi-ambassador to date. And so this position would be a full-time position for an ambassador, co-shared with all the partners over the course of the next 4 years. The federal government, both EPA and DOI, are considering co-share funding to match or to supplement that, and that will be available on an annual basis. There's also an environmental justice grant that has gone to Rail Mesa. We have been working on a West Mesa River Community Heat Action Grant, which will be concluding this spring, and which we hope to have 300 trees within river community neighborhoods within West Mesa implemented at that time. We are about 3/4 of the way through with that at this point. We also have an upcoming Rio Healthy Urban River Ecosystems Grant, which will look at all 3 reaches of the river, east, central, and west, and think about ways in which conservation education and literacy will convert to community events that actually start to activate the river. In addition, there has been a grant that was pursued for the Lower Gila River Collaborative and the El Rio Vegetation Management Plan by the Flood Control District of Maricopa County to look at water quality. That study will be concluding here in the next couple of months. And then finally, a Rio Youth Conservation Corps grant, which will be awarded to the Arizona Sustainability Alliance to actually work with disadvantaged communities along the river and engage youth conservation through the school system. Next slide. And so while those grants are smaller grants, we're talking about the ability to leverage the IIJA Resilience Program grants. So I wanted to feature what we know around these systems already. So under the first one, wildfire risk reduction, which is DOI and Fish and Wildlife Service, essentially funding those improvements, we already have current funding within the wildfire risk reduction program that has come through Fish and Wildlife through the DRIP Act funding, which Senator Sinema proposed, which should be $10 million annually. So for those of you that might not know, we have a very invasive species along the river corridor called salt cedar. Salt cedar is also a water conservation issue because it presents itself within the river corridor, outcompetes native species, and then also has a tendency to be attracted to very high salinity soils, which causes this particular species then also has a high oil content and causes a high potential for wildfire risk. So there has been a lot of money that has been focused along the river corridors in Arizona in order to offset that public safety risk. There have also been fires within the Salt and Gila in the last couple of years, and have been so over many years, that have focused on this issue, the fact that they're high ignition species and that they can affect our national grid for energy as well. So that's why you see so much money focused on wildfire risk, even here in Maricopa County. There are 2 other state funding pools for the very same thing, the Healthy Forests Initiative Program, which covers the whole state, an invasive species removal program, which focuses on salt cedar and other invasive species along our river corridors, and also a new bill that was introduced into state legislature, the Jackie Meck Fund, which focuses on the West Valley and the Gila River and removing salt cedar. So there is a history of doing this work. I will say the importance of these programs is that many of them focus only on removal of species. There's a couple that focus on restoration, but there are not many that focus on restoration with native species coupled with long-term management. And that is something that is a key part of where we could seek funding for the corridor. In addition, the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities, or BRIC, which is under FEMA, In the 2021 draft of the hazard mitigation plan, which is done with all the cities in the county, there has been discussion of the primary areas as usual: flood control, utility and infrastructure protection, wildfire management, relocation of critical infrastructure, shelters, and in this newest edition, a high interest in heat mitigation. So urban canopy is one of those items in which everybody is hoping will be added to building to the BRIC program, and could be another avenue along with some of those others. Next slide. We talked about the main category being ecosystem restoration. The primary areas under this are stewardship or management contracts for these areas. Also, what we've highlighted as being typical ecosystem restoration projects. There's also an invasive species detection and prevention category, and a native vegetation restoration effort. So you can see how many of these categories could actually overlap and benefit with supplemental programs. The last one I want to highlight is the Water Smart program through Department of Interior and Bureau of Reclamation. This focuses on the 20 Western states and Hawaii. This program's only available to them. And I think we've lost my highlights on these, but the first out of all these categories, I just want to focus on 4 of them. So the first one would be water, energy, and efficiency grants. There is some possibility for projects such as the El Rio Confluence Lake, a large impoundment structure, et cetera, that could be eligible under the Water and Energy Efficiency Act. Also, environmental water resources projects, which is another category under here. These are projects that are looking to be implemented that focus on environmental restoration within river corridors. And then also the Cooperative Watershed Management Program is one of the only programs under this particular Water Smart category that doesn't require any matching funds. It is a 2 to 3 year program that allows watershed planning by utilities, cities, or nonprofits to come together and to put together a watershed plan. Their typical ceilings to date have been $200,000, but I think under this current additional funding, we will see those numbers increase in each of these programs. The last one I just wanted to highlight was Water Conservation Field Services Program. This is particularly useful for those communities that want to support their ag industries or even urban farming, which can leverage monies under these programs to actually look at supporting local food or large commercial agriculture as well. So next slide. So with that, I just wanted to conclude that although we're very focused and working with the partners, we've also been working on creating a new social impact organization that would focus solely on the Rio Reimagined. I mentioned the Urban Waters Federal Partnership Ambassador. We have been working with all of the communities on a regional planning framework, and also how to leverage the community voice, which could be through an equity and inclusion coalition. And then also working with each of the communities on ongoing grants and technical assistance that can support these priorities. And so with that comes the expansion of the network with more nonprofits, more community organizations, more private sector partners to help support the work. We've had funding from the private sector come and match many of these areas of public financing to date. And so that would be another opportunity under leveraging even deeper dollars. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Melissa and Cecilia, for managing the chat and providing some links and additional information. I think this overview provides a really good understanding of the base that exists in that currently exists with this initiative. The relationships with those federal organizations is definitely noteworthy. And I'm curious, I'm going to go back to one of the beginning slides. Under the proposed programs, this slide here, are any of your organizations looking at these proposed projects through the IIJA funding and making plans or having any conversations around using this funding as an opportunity to complete these projects? I'm just curious if there's any conversations with that taking place.
Yeah, the city of Phoenix is definitely looking to leverage these funds, both for environmental restoration and also for that pedestrian bike bridge. They've applied or will be applying for a grant to support that as well. We have been working with the Lower Gila River Collaborative to actually think about leveraging this opportunity for many of the items that I mentioned in the West Valley, whether it be the El Rio Confluence Lake, which the flood control district is seeking partnership and volunteer to be a leader in that. It could be a very primary project under this, or their restoration efforts, which many of these categories actually fit very well with that.
Yeah, there's some folks here from on the city of Phoenix and in the water. Can anybody from Phoenix speak to maybe what they have planned for the restoration project? I'm just curious about that. Nobody's aware.
I know the one Melissa mentioned was, yeah, it'll be a $25 million application with a 15 million matching from the city to build that pedestrian bridge across the Rio Salado, and sort of studying, making sure there's no habitat impact, and looking at that for the pedestrian bridge, and then surrounding area and doing some green infrastructure along the banks of the river as well. So
is there any conversation about the public outreach portion of that, or getting community-based organizations or any workforce, just going back to some of those signals that Catherine mentioned in an earlier slide that will make a super successful grant application? Has there been any discussion on adding in some of those elements at all?
Yeah, I couldn't speak to it fully, but I do know they have been doing community outreach and talking to organizations to join in on that. But I don't know, Melissa, if you heard it any more than I, but I certainly know, I'm aware of the application.
Yeah, I mean, the many of the partners within the Rio have actually been asked by the city for letters of support for the pedestrian bike bridge. I will say that in terms of Catherine's points, and I should be clear, and at the city of Phoenix, most of the environmental restoration projects are being spearheaded by the Office of Environmental Programs. So Roseanne Albright, Tricia Bailiff, et cetera, in combination with parks. So I know Jared Rogers is on the line, and he can speak to kind of some of the efforts that in which the river that the city is prioritizing within the river.
Yeah, but Melissa, this is Jared. I was going to mention that we have been working with the Office of Environmental Programs, but also our Streets Transportation Department are working on the PED Bridge. They're actually making the application in conjunction with the Office of Environmental Programs, and they have done a series of public outreach meetings. I know, for example, the Audubon Society, they're definitely have written a letter of support. We as the Parks Department have as well. Some of the improvements that Mark mentioned on the banks of the river include from Central to 24th Street, an improved bike pathway, so that leads towards Tempe ultimately, with low level lighting appropriate for wildlife, make sure that we have the right color temperature, so there's a lot of good efforts in planning, working within our departments towards that end as well.
Sure. Thanks for that, Jared. And Melissa, you mentioned this, and it's been brought up in the discussion, the nexus of the transportation element, a regional transportation element to this. And I see it clearly, and I'm nowhere near as expert as some of you all in this space. But there certainly is definitely some overlap there in priorities. And I guess I don't want to call you out too much, but I do want to recognize Tim Franquist, who's with Maricopa Association of Governments, as their new environmental director. I think I'm getting that title right, but correct me if I'm wrong, Tim. And just curious on your thoughts, or if you see any opportunity here with some of the ecosystem restoration work, the water improvement work, brownfields work and development work, as it kind of overlaps with a regional transportation priorities.
Thank you, Brianne. And we also got Patrick Stone here, who might be able to speak more to the transportation aspect of it. I can tell you from an environmental aspect, we love it. The regional approach that everybody is taking, fantastic. As an air quality person, seeing water and trees and stabilization in the river is absolutely crucial to particulate matter production, dust. And I think it's just a good thing for our region. I'm from Maryland originally, where rivers are taken very serious. Along the Chesapeake Bay, there's 1,000-foot corridors for any disturbances. I'm glad to see the area getting this sensitivity around the river, because it's a vital resource. But I think where MAG kind of will come into this is obviously all the cities you have here with the tribes are all members of MAG, and so for us, just the regional consistency, I think we're still trying to figure out where our elected would want us to play in this field. So this is something that the regional council certainly would weigh in on. So we're kind of waiting for that direction. I think we're going to start to step into that territory over the next probably a couple of months. So we're still trying to figure out where we play in this, but I think just in general, we're quite supportive of all the efforts along the river. So I don't know, Patrick, if you had anything to add to that, or if that kind of covers it.
No, thanks, Tim. I think one thing where, and I heard this mentioned earlier, we just last week, the RAISE grant applications were taken through MAG Regional Council for letters of support. One of those projects just was the 3rd Street bike bed bridge over the Rio Salado. So I do think you see that regional coordination that Tim alluded to, and the ability to, where we can, participate and assist, especially in those regional planning efforts.
Yeah, I definitely see some assistance from MAG being helpful if we eventually see an opportunity at the nexus of this river corridor and our regional transportation efforts. The other thing that kind of stuck out to me as an opportunity, or a potential opportunity, is the food element, right? The urban agriculture. Again, just I tend to be thinking in Catherine's signals that she's giving us, and that workforce piece that is so critical to the federal government right now, and for our communities. And I think there could be a really cool opportunity in some type of urban agriculture along the river corridor, possibly getting our tribal communities involved. I don't think we have anybody here from to represent any of our tribes, which is unfortunate, but hopefully something we can make sure we have a targeted effort for next time in our workshop. I'm not as familiar in the urban agricultural world, but does anybody have any experience with that, or have seen any programs elsewhere that could be replicated, or see this as a cool opportunity like I do? Maybe I'm a big foodie, so maybe that's just what excites me the most. Any thoughts there? Does anybody have any programs that they've seen be successful? Braden, I know that you've had some interest in getting urban agriculture up and running in Tempe specifically, but any thoughts there?
Well, yeah, I mean, Phoenix has had some really great leadership on the local food movement, and the Office of Environmental Programs has done an amazing job. And the other issue of note is like right along the river, there's the fresh, I'm not remembering the full official name, the fresh development of doing this sort of local food hub right in the river corridor. Rio has been helping support that effort as well. So I do agree with you, Brian. I think that there's some really great resilient food and local food economy development work that could be that we might be able to find a funding approach for in this work as well. It's a great point.
Hi, Brianne. I'm Michael Chamberlain. I'm with Maricopa County Cooperative Extension with the University of Arizona. And I personally work more with invasive species and with ornamental horticulture, the landscape industry. But here in Cooperative Extension, we do have a number of programs that touch on the urban agriculture and urban farming. And I have some office mates just down the hall from me who are particularly involved with that.
Very cool. Has there been any discussion specifically along the Salt River on any projects or potential partnerships in your work group?
Yeah, well, I don't know exactly. Well, I suppose I can talk about this, that we were approached by, I think it was an Amazon outlet that was looking at an installation right along the river corridor. And this was before COVID, so I'm not really sure what happened to that plan. We haven't heard further from regarding that initiative, but it was something that we chipped in and offered some of our suggestions on design and approaches that would happen there. But I'm not too sure what happened with that.
Sure. Okay.
Also, I've been involved with some of the invasive species issues, such as the stinknet weed, which has been a problem along the corridor, and also has been causing air quality issues. The stink and the effect of this plant has been creating allergies.
Do you mind putting the link to the exchange in the chat? I know you introduced yourself, but maybe for others to explore that, I kind of want to look more into that. That would be awesome.
I'll do that. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, I think that we're about needing to wrap up with this conversation. Does any, I guess I'll pull up my other PowerPoint here. We have a little bit of a poll that we are wanting to do, and it just helps capture maybe some not said thoughts.
And Melissa, I had a question that I put in the chat. I know there was a lot of conversation about the food, but as far as the 2-mile buffer along the river corridor, is there any centralized effort, amongst the communities to build that out more to a more consistent plan?
I'm not sure what you mean by build it out. Each community is connecting with the neighborhoods within that buffer to prioritize certain efforts. And we're leaving that up to each of the communities so far to identify certain things. So there has been in the past already technical assistance through Urban Waters for Local Foods, for instance. Mm-hmm. There has been technical assistance done for planning, potential planning along the river for, we also, as I mentioned, focused on brownfields, which actually engaged a number of the neighborhoods in that particular community or in those particular communities. So it depends on what it is and, which municipality or entity is sort of spearheading the investigation.
Okay. I was thinking more of like a consistent effort amongst all the communities to coordinate and share information, just so that maybe there's some consistency amongst the 2-mile efforts.
Oh, you're talking more like a geographic boundary, so to speak?
No, just more of a networking type effort, just kind of connecting those groups essentially in those efforts. I can talk.
We haven't seen anything like that to date necessarily.
Okay.
And let's connect offline, because I'd like to know more about, I'm still not clear as to what you're asking.
Sure.
But we'll certainly follow up with you for sure.
No problems. All right, Brianne, I'll go ahead and close the poll.
Perfect.
And would you like to share the results?
Let's actually just wait till the end to do that.
Okay.
I think we're all a little bit eager to get to some electric vehicles conversation. I know that it is all the buzz amongst cities, amongst residents, amongst businesses. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. And again, I'm just pulling up this slide to identify that there is a federal funding program specifically for charging and fueling infrastructure grants. It's a competitive grant to install EV charging and low carbon fueling infrastructure, and some criteria is that rural areas, low and moderate income neighborhoods, and communities with low ratios of private parking and high ratios of multi-unit dwellings. And that's just a little brief description of what that program is seeking and looking for. We know that there is some levels of regional collaboration taking place. That's what you're going to be hearing from today. And then again, let's focus on, and as you hear about some of the regional work that's taking place, how are we able to scale this in the framework of can we hit on workforce development? Can we hit on equity and community-based partnerships? And what kind of regional approach can this take? And what does this look like? So with that, just some framing, I will introduce Danae and Karen. If you all are ready and willing, they are co-chairs of the Energy Efficiency Work Group of the Sustainable Cities Network.
Perfect. So Karen and I are going to kind of tag team this. I'll start us off with a really quick recap, a little bit more on what Brianne was talking about. So this federal infrastructure bill has $7.5 billion investment carved out for building a national network of electric vehicle charging stations. And it's set out to have 500,000 EV charging stations nationwide. And kind of what that looks like is there's these two different main programs. There's a formula funding side where states are allocated a certain percentage of guaranteed funding. For Arizona, that's looking like it'll be about 76 million over 5 years. So a good investment for sure. And that's going to be led by Department of Transportation here in Arizona. And that's going to target charging along our major corridors and interstates. And then more what we're going to focus on with this group is the grant program, which is a national competitive grant, $2.5 billion. This is a monumental opportunity. And to Brianne's point, looking again at chargers for rural, disadvantaged, and other hard to reach communities. We'll talk a little bit more about what that means, as well as planning efforts. Next slide. So we're going to talk a little bit about, to Catherine's point of here's what it would take to have a good grant application, the regional collaborations, the equity components, the workforce development, and community partnerships. So we're going to break those out. And Karen, do you want to start with our regional collaborations, kind of what we're already got in store?
Sure. So, and let me dive in down to the bottom of the utility partners. So there has been some work done in some regional EV studies. APS and Tucson Electric Power were, I guess, mandated by the ACC to work on a statewide transportation electrification plan. that set a goal of 1.1 or 1.076 million EVs in Arizona by 2030. And as Danae has here on the slide, we've got 41,000 EVs today in the state registered. So APS certainly has programs and incentives and has a planning document that they've looked at for EV charging needs and how they're going to support in their service territory this goal of 1.1 million EVs. SRP also has EV goals and has their own planning documents in-house, and they have set up the SRP Transportation Electrification Activator Collaborative. It meets monthly. There's two. There's one by APS and there's also one by SRP. So I know City of Phoenix is a member of the SRP TE Activator work group with SRP. We're looking at how we can regionally collaborate on EV charging issues, how we can get more EVs adopted. It's a limited group right now, but SRP is looking at including more members to the TE Activator. APS, I believe we've got a meeting this week on their collaborative. But one of the points I want to make clear is we've got some of these regional partnerships and planning opportunities happening. But where I think we're lacking at, and I'm hoping this group is looking at, is how we can bring a more cohesive regional approach where we have more of a collective and a repository of information, data. We are in desperate need of data for EV registration data and projections. And I'm hoping MAG can help us with that and like to hear their approach on that. But this is the utilities, the utility partnerships they've started. They certainly are meeting. It is a place to have collective. We wouldn't be where we're at without our utility partners, but we do know that they have a vested interest and they are along for this ride. But I think they're a partnership that needs to keep traveling down the road with us, but I do think there's opportunity for a larger collective where they're at the table and not the leader of the table. So can we talk about the next slide? Janae, anything else to add to that slide?
Do you want to touch on the Sustainable Cities Network just for those that maybe
Sure.
haven't been to those meetings before?
Sure, sorry. So Arizona State has their Sustainable Cities Network, and one of their groups was the Solar Efficiency and Energy, and I might have messed up that name, but it was the SEE, Solar Energy and Efficiency. And because EVs became so popular, this topic became so popular, we were starting to hijack those meetings with all of our topics and interests and questions. So we have subsequently spun off an EV work group of the Solar and Energy Efficiency larger group. So we meet every other month and with topics such as EV siting studies, plans, projections, what cities are working on. We often have outside speakers come in and talk with our groups, speakers from Electrification Coalition, SRP, it came to talk about their statewide transportation plan. So it's just another collaborative data collection, data sharing that we have tried to start up with other municipalities and tribes and utility partners. So it's been, I think, very successful. We certainly have a lot of representation and attendance at our meetings, and we polled our members to ask what they wanted to hear about. So we're honoring those topics and just again, if the EV collaborative or the ASU's EV work group can be another repository of data and information sharing, that's what we're there for. So and not so much of an activator, but it's just how can we share data. We know there's quite a few municipalities around the valley that don't have a dedicated EV staff. They wear a lot of hats, so we want to bring those municipalities along and provide information that they maybe don't have time to access.
So then the other really critical component of this is there's a lot of inequity that's kind of built into transportation systems here, you know, regionally, and of course beyond just our region. But with this kind of transportation electrification opportunity, we can also get really smart and strategic about how to improve equity while transitioning to a cleaner source of fuel. And a few key ways, this is not a comprehensive list at all, but some things for us to be thinking about is just making sure that the process is inclusive and that we're inviting, you know, diversity of experiences and perspectives to the table that are helping to inform that planning and decision-making process, developing some strategies that target disadvantaged communities, that may be low-income households, that can also be renters in multifamily units. That's gotten a lot of attention recently because if you don't own your parking space, it's really difficult to be able to put in a charger, even if you had the means to do that. And so as electric vehicles become more popular, we are not seeing the same level of access for people that are living in multifamily units in particular. So that one gets called out a lot. Also, access to electric transportation through other means. So not everybody needs to own an electric vehicle to have a clean electric option. So looking at how do we electrify public transit, and we know Valley Metro is working on electrifying some of their buses and piloting that technology. How can cities help support that, or to pilot our own, micro transit or micro mobility electric versions? And then there's some really neat ride sharing opportunities that I'm seeing elsewhere in the nation that are, electric ride sharing hubs, usually with a really neat workforce component where you have community members that are working at this hub and they're able to help people get to work and school, using a clean source of shared community assets. And then another key piece of the equity with electrification is thinking about all of those jobs that are currently associated with our internal combustion engines. So all of our mechanics and our parts professionals, and what does a future of electric vehicles look like for them, and how do we ensure that those industries have a just transition and an opportunity to thrive in an EV market. And then also looking at workforce development more broadly to ensure that there's access to these really good green jobs for communities that have been historically underrepresented or underserved.
So as Melissa was talking about the Rio Reimagined, I was thinking about other community partnership opportunities. And these are just a few, besides our utility partners that we think would be great partnerships. Again, I'm thinking about Melissa's slide where she had all of her federal agencies and other stakeholder partners. SWEEP, Southwest Energy Efficiency Project, certainly has been doing a lot of work in this space. The Phoenix Electric Auto Association has EV advocates that are more than happy to help educate and inform the public on the benefits of EVs. CHISPA is another potential community partner from the equity perspective. They lend their voices to the Hispanic network. Western Resources Advocates has done a lot of policy work in terms of EVs and clean energy management. Of course, our partners at Arizona State with our research arms and policy and all the projects that they've been working on. MCCCD, Danae, you want to help me with that one? Maricopa County.
Yeah, Community College District.
Oh, community
colleges. All of
our
10 community colleges.
Yeah, certainly provide another opportunity for outreach, education, research opportunities. Again, our utility partners, SRP, APS. And I wanted to add a few more that I was thinking about when I was listening to Melissa talk. So we've got other partners such as Valley Metro from the transit perspective and their regional approach to electrification. Valley of the Sun Clean Cities is another great organization that advances alternative fuels. AZ Forward has also been working on a mobility and clean air subgroup. So they've been looking at this space as well. The Nature Conservancy has another collective that has been looking about mobility and improvements for environmental. Melissa mentioned the Arizona Sustainability Alliance. That's another one. Certainly our tribal partners need to come along with us on this journey because they certainly have EV charging and EV needs as well. And then some other state and federal and regional partnerships of certainly our ADOT partners, our MAG partners, ADEQ, American Lung Association as a nonprofit, certainly Maricopa County Air Quality and their transportation sections, Local First. And these are just to keep naming a few of more community partnerships. And then again, I do think there's a real opportunity to leverage our electric valley that we are starting to become here within our region. So, you know, we've, to Danae's point about workforce development, we've got companies popping up daily, monthly that looks, that's battery manufacturing, battery recycling, actual OEMs that are coming to the Valley with Electrica Mechanica. We've got the conversions of ICE vehicles to EVs. So I think we need to leverage those partnerships from the private side to see where, if there's an opportunity for potential funding or grant matching, or again, just to throw that into the mix of community partnerships. And again, I see some more in the chat that certainly we can add to the list, but definitely not lacking in folks to bring into this opportunity. And again, going back to the utilities, real strong need to bring them in early to this process because of the grid impacts. We're talking a lot of electrical needs to facilitate the planning horizons, planning projections for our EVs. We, City of Phoenix alone, are projecting 280 EVs in our city boundaries by 2030. And we have around 7,500 today. So again, opportunities for data collection, data processing, planning and design grants, vehicle purchases through bulk buys. I see a strong need for planning and design. And I know that Danae offered up one of the grants areas, and Melissa provided that great table. And I do think there's some other fits in the grant categories that we should be looking at for planning and design from a regional perspective. And again, looking at vehicle bulk buys as well. And certainly equity goes without saying that we need to establish some tools, and there are some existing tools that we can use for equity mapping and looking at needs assessments. What do our communities want and what do they need in terms of electrification? Because it's not all going to look the same. So we need, again, the collective voice to be looking at that.
I love that, Karen. And I think you were mentioning, this Electric Valley, how there's so much energy right now around electric vehicles and how the region is getting known, not as Silicon Valley, but as Electric Valley. And this list is like impossible to keep up to date because it continuously grows. But a few of the key kind of on the labor and workforce development side, a few of the key players, we know we have some academic partners that are really interested in working hard in this space already. That would include our community college districts. That of course includes our public universities, ASU, U of A, NAU, and Universal Technical Institute as well. Some really great things coming out of both Arizona Commerce Authority and GPEC, Greater Phoenix Economic Council. looking at how do we make sure that we have talent to support this growing industry. And then the actual, where the rubber meets the road for our Electric Valley is that we've become kind of this hotbed for testing out different components of the supply chain, and not even testing, but really demonstrating that we can build it locally here. And that includes zero electric vehicles. They're based out of Tempe and Gilbert. They convert internal combustion engines into electric vehicles. So really neat way to repurpose, all the functional components of your vehicle, but have it be electric instead of gas. Nikola, which is both a leader on the electric front and on the hydrogen front for our big rigs, the semi trucks, a really important industry in areas to electrify and support through hydrogen fuel as well. Electromechanica, they're out in Mesa. They make those really fun 3-wheel, smaller cars that are meant to be a more affordable option for people looking to do EVs. And I don't need to go through all of these, but just to let you know that there's a lot of diversity within the state, and we're seeing continued attraction because of Arizona's really friendly business environment and access to talent and high quality of life that the cities and towns provide. So what this means is there's a lot of opportunities to partner and work together to make sure that there's local talent that can be developed and provided access to these good green jobs, and that's already started. So there's some really great things that I know ASU is working really closely with zero electric vehicles, for instance. Maricopa Community Colleges is really supporting Lucid's workforce development needs, and they want to train people locally to be able to do this. And many more that are coming. Even Karen and I went and visited a high school, and they were so eager to learn more and to do interns at these types of places. So we'd like to be thinking about that as we develop plans. So a few high kind of 30,000 foot level priority areas would be that regional planning, making sure that we're being thoughtful about where charging infrastructure is needed and how it gets there. Looking at also supporting a regional DC fast charging network. This is an area that's really tough for cities to tackle because those superchargers and fast chargers are really expensive and often out of reach of city budgets. And so leveraging these big investments and supporting a regional network is going to be really key to making sure that we can have a viable transition to electric vehicles. And then where there's a really immediate and kind of low-hanging fruit opportunity for cities and towns and tribes is looking at what property is city owned. That might be libraries, parks, event centers, community resource centers, things of that nature, where the city can help fill gaps where there's charging lacking, and especially in areas where there's maybe a higher percentage of multifamily or a higher percentage of disadvantaged or low income communities. Cities can play an important role to alleviate some of that stress that people would have if they don't have access to reliable charging. At home, they'll rely on public charging, and that's really where our cities can come in and help break that barrier down. And then the other really neat opportunity is looking at how can we pilot different forms of electric transportation regionally and within our communities to have electric public transit options. I'm seeing way more electric microtransit pilots now, and these are kind of like when cities have their own Uber or Lyft and it's within a designated area. So people don't have to wait for a bus on a fixed route. It's more flexible, but it's usually within a certain area. And so seeing a lot more of that. And then again, ride sharing with electric vehicles. So Karen, what else did we miss? What should we throw out there?
And I just want to add into the pilot, again, the micromobility with e-scooters and e-bicycles, and looking at incentives, options, and whether it's a regional incentives or local incentives, car sharing opportunities. So again, some opportunities to marry up equity in these pilots and or looking at last mile kinds of pilots, charging hubs, DC fast charging hubs. So I think you hit them all, but
yeah, and actually I'm watching the chat now and I'm seeing some really great feedback on the integration with solar, and yes, and yes, and solar and battery is even better because that builds some resilience. So if we are in a situation where there's a grid outage, and let's imagine in the future there's a high dependence on electric vehicles, we need places where people can safely charge up. And so building resilience by having some a number of charging stations that can have their own backup battery storage, especially paired with solar, to make it a more clean fuel is just so exciting.
And I will add to Danae, one of the things that I think is very important is the education and the outreach piece. Whether or not that's grant eligible, maybe it's how we creatively write a regional grant, but education and outreach is so paramount to adoption and understanding. That to me, I think if there's a way that we can weave in education and outreach into a grant, we should be doing that.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great point, Karen. And that's something we're working on, is we're trying to spend any amount of money that we get from our mayor and council on that educational and outreach side, understanding that the utilities and grants, there are going to be ways to come in with the infrastructure side, but figuring out how we're going to get that outreach side and do that movement building and community work, that we have to find different pockets of funding to make that happen, or somehow weave as much of that into the infrastructure funding as we can. One question for both of you. So as you think about, at some point in the next 6 months, this grant is going to drop, and this, a grant call is going to drop for this, for these equitable EV charging infrastructure. And you all have laid out, I love what you've done today. You've laid out this incredible vision for all of these partners and the type of work that we can be applying for in this grant. In your mind, what's really missing? What do you need? I heard you make a call that you really need MAG's technical support on mapping. I think that was a really important thing to be very clear about. What are some other critical needs? And I want to flag the fact that part of the resources we have from Vitalist Health Foundation are going to help with community-based organizations. So the work that Chispa and Unlimited Potential are going to be doing in the next 6 to 9 months to really help create that nonprofit voice and to work on equity, guiding principles. I think that's going to be really helpful for your grant too. So outside of the equity support from UP and the technical support from Maricopa County and from MAG, what else is missing, do you think, to make sure that we're really putting our best foot forward when we apply for this Department of Transportation grant?
You want to take it?
I can take.
Yeah.
I can take
I'll follow up.
First stab at that. So Phoenix is really so fortunate to have Karen, who spends so much time and energy focused on this area. Many cities and towns don't have anybody, and certainly Phoenix needs 1 million Karens to do the scale of work that's needed. But I think any opportunity where we don't have to reinvent the wheel, and so looking to our amazing partners in the county and MAG to do this work more regionally, but to where we still really need, where that gap is, like we want to do it regionally, but then we need to know what our own cities, how do we fit into that? And so Maricopa County, and I think Phil is on next, did an amazing job of doing this for greenhouse gas emissions inventory, where they really undertook a big burden of doing a community-wide emissions inventory, which is something that a lot of cities rely on, but don't readily have access to. they did it for the whole county, and then they split it out by cities. And so we could see, here's how we fit into that. And so to have that kind of model replicated again for EVs, to know, all right, here's the big picture and here's our piece of it. That's really helpful.
Yeah, I would agree that it's mapping, it's data collection that's current and correct data. Because again, what I'm finding is some of the data that we get when we get it is got electric golf carts and cars that aren't electric in it. So it really skews the numbers, and not so concerned about hybrids. I care what has a plug. So when the data's got hybrids in it, it's again, the data is skewed. So data mapping, surveying, looking at the bigger picture. And I think you're spot on, Danae. It's how can MAG help us? And I would love to see all of our cities come together with their own planning documents, hand them off to MAG, and then let them make the bigger picture. So they certainly need our input, where we can do our individual planning for EV charger locations, give it to MAG, let them do a more regional perspective. That way they've got the input from individual communities. I think that would be helpful. And again, just to be a repository, a central repository. So as Danae said, we don't have to recreate the wheel, and we don't have 18 different factions out here all trying to do the same work. So right now that's what we have, and it's great and it's working, but I think we can improve.
And the last other thing, I think for a successful grant, those communities that do have the time and resources or the capacity to work on this, we need to come together, but then we need to open up that invite to those communities that are interested but don't have the capacity. So having some easy way to sign on so that they have access to those funds when we get them is, I think, going to be another key piece of our regional success. Yep, Braden, you're capturing that perfect.
That's a great point, Danae. So for instance, just so we can all visualize it, you know, the grant would maybe have 3 tiers: cities that have the staff and the ability, well, maybe 4 tiers: funding for support at the county and MAG level, support for the cities that have staff and ability to implement deep programs, support for cities that have some staff but don't have a dedicated staff to EVs and want to do sort of a mid-level worth of programming, and then some amount of funding for cities that basically don't have any staff but would be willing to take on a few more an equitable charging infrastructure demo project. So that's the difference, because let's just be really clear on this for everyone in the room. Phoenix could go and apply for this grant tomorrow by themselves and get several $1 million to do equitable EV infrastructure, and conversation's done. And that's the way it happens. You know, that means that 1.5 million people in our region get more EV infrastructure, and the rest of us have to wait another 10 or 15 years for federal investment. And to tell you the truth, that's going to happen in a bunch of different places with this IIJA funding, where Phoenix will apply and they'll just get the money. And the question is, do enough of us around the table make it easy enough for Phoenix to do this more comprehensive approach? For Karen, and the thing I love about Karen and Mark and the way they're handling this is they know for EVs that if EVs are going to truly transform Phoenix, they have to transform the region. A huge amount of Phoenix's transportation emissions are from other cities' people's driving to and through Phoenix. So Phoenix has to solve this problem regionally, and that's why they're going to be willing to go after this regional grant. Now, the same is true for other transportation and water issues, but the city of Phoenix doesn't always act this way. So we have to make sure we use EVs as a teaching tool to show the city of Phoenix that acting in this collaborative way is good for Phoenix and good for the whole region. And so I'm just so grateful to Karen and Danae, for this work, and also to Karen and Mark for the way that they're having this sort of holistic thinking around EVs. I just deeply appreciate it, because you don't have to be as generous as you're being right now, and I think it's going to have decadal long impact, that the fact that you're approaching this in such a collective and holistic way.
This is Brian. Phil, it looked like you were interested in saying something. For the sake of time, we're going to not have him go through his presentation, but I didn't know if you wanted to add anything, Phil.
Well, I mean, my whole presentation basically was to tag on to what Danae and what the whole conversation's been. So in a nutshell, what we wanted to do was the same thing what we did with the greenhouse gas thing. I wanted to apply for the competitive grant and make it available to all of our 3,200 travel reduction participants, which is every city, every school, every business that has more than 50. So the plan would be, I know Phoenix is big enough to do it themselves and Tempe, but there's going to be 24 cities that aren't big enough, and there's going to be a lot of businesses that aren't big enough. And I wanted to try to create a program where small cities and small businesses, as long as we can argue that it's publicly accessible, and just make that where we'd actually have a contractor put the EVs into these facilities, on behalf of these companies. We run it the same way we do our fireplace program. If you have a wood burning fireplace, we will convert it, just apply, and we do all the work. They just have to apply. We pay 100% of it. So that's what I was trying to see, but I don't know if that can work because I don't know what the grant conditions are. I don't know what the co-payments are. But so we are the fill in the gap is what Brandon and you guys have been talking about the last few minutes. Is we can help the small entities that can't do it themselves. But the missing thing that we don't have is we don't have a planning document. So that's why I've met with Tim at MAG. They can do some planning document. Because they're not going to install EVs, but they're the planners. They can do that on a regional basis. And then we on a regional basis can actually be the EV installers if we get the grant and, and meet the conditions. I think the equity part is going to be a challenge because I don't have a planning document that shows where that needs to go. But I think we could be the actual implementers to actually install the EVs on these entities that apply. And it probably wouldn't be the big cities, but it would be the people that need the help the most. So that's the big picture. I don't know if it'll work because I don't know what the grant conditions are. I don't know if we'll win the grant, but that's sort of the plan. And we're the regional entity. I think MAG could be the regional planning entity. And then you have all the cities that would help participate and be the technical experts too. In a nutshell.
Phil, I love that. And yeah, I'm hoping that those guidelines allow for that kind of model because I think that's just awesome if we can accomplish that. Yes. Yeah. And thank you for looking out for everybody in the county. I know that's there's a lot of us. So.
Well, and I'm only focused on EV, so I'm just like laser focused on that. You guys have other focuses, but I think eventually that's the secret to air quality meeting these standards is 2040 if we have 30% EVs out there, our air quality is going to be a lot better for everybody. So that's the future.
Does anybody from any other cities or on the call want to add anything here? I do think it's quite amazing that every level of government entity from the state to the county to the private sector, there's so many players involved, and I think it creates such a good opportunity to put in for one of these competitive grants, a multi-city, multi-sector grant that could really do a lot of good and put this region on the map. I know that this grant funding will be very competitive, so I think the more creative we can get and the more players involved in this joint application will be beneficial to us. But I think this is a huge opportunity with all of the private sector folks here, with the amount of talent pool that we have here. I think that the opportunity is very large. Anybody have any other last minute thoughts on this? If not, we can begin to wrap up.
Yeah, and I just have one other comment. So I know this group is going to be focusing more on those competitive grants, but Arizona is going to receive that estimated 76 million through the formula funding that goes to the state. And so the state, my understanding is that the state is required to submit a plan to US DOT, and then it gets approved, and that's what those funds are able to be used for. So there's an opportunity for cities to weigh in and say, okay, you know, state, include in your plan some of these key elements that'll really support this work. And I believe that application is due in August. And so there's this short window where ADOT is being challenged to come up with a plan. And if you guys hear of any opportunities to help influence that, please share it.
Yeah, I think there are. Brianne and I have heard of a few opportunities to make that happen, and potentially getting some state folks to the next EV sub-working group meeting with SCN would be a good way to do that. So Brianne and I will follow up with you about some ideas on how to be in deeper conversation with the state in the short term.
Yeah, and some good news on that. I was actually really impressed with Mag, has been very much engaged in talking. ADOS actually assigned someone to kind of lead this whole effort, Thor, I'm trying to remember his last name, and he's really good and open. And I think Meg has had some good conversations with him, and we've talked with Meg as well. And so there is some good connections happening on that. They're pretty focused on just infrastructure solely for along the highways, but you know, it's all in a mile corridor along highways, and particularly they'll connect a lot of the rural communities as well, where there's currently not infrastructure. They're going to kind of prioritize those as well. And then Karen and I have also had a conversation with Electrify America, and they're adding a lot of infrastructure to Arizona and made that connection to ADOT. So Electrify America has another 500 million round that they're putting in. And their goal is to have stations every 70 miles along all highways. So that's, yeah, so some real good opportunities there of connecting all those dots.
Okay, with that, I am going to, we have the poll questions pulled up, and this is, again, just a helpful tool for us in kind of figuring out next steps and being able to coordinate this effort a little bit more based off of what you've heard. Just some reflection and feedback is super helpful for us. So we'll give you guys a couple of minutes to just reflect on the EV conversation, what you heard. Okay, and then the last poll question that we have for you all is just reflecting not necessarily just on the two discussions that we had, but overall in this grant series, this grant incubator workshops that we are going to continue to have. In 5 words or less, what would you like to see explored further in this series, based off of this conversation, based off of the first workshop? If you could just reflect on that for a bit longer, and what would be helpful to you and your organization, what would be helpful to the region in becoming ready and prepared to receive some of this grant funding.
Okay, so this is ecosystem restoration comments and responses.
Okay, so some good brainstorming. Okay.
And then for EVs.
All right, a little bit more of the yes, right up our alley, which makes sense. We all know EVs has a lot of energy behind it right now.
Are you able to scroll down on that, Anne?
No, we're not able to. I think that we'll provide, you know, in the 5 words or less, the short answer. I think Anne is able to see some of those responses, but we'll make sure we have that. We're interested in seeing what those responses are, just so we have a better idea of what exactly is getting people excited for both EVs and ecosystem restorations. And then, you know, moving forward, we can see where there's interest in how we can facilitate conversations around what is making folks excited in these areas. That's kind of the direction that we're going to take, and that's why those polls were helpful. So thank you again to Danae and Cecilia and Melissa and Karen and Phil for being able to speak today and providing us an overview. I think that one way to determine where we can do some joint applications is where there's already energy, where there's already some capacity, where there's already some regional collaboration. So that's what we provided everybody today, was just some overview of those areas. We do have the next workshop scheduled for April 26th. Same time, Tuesday, 8:30 to 10:30. And really we'll be focusing on partnering with community-based organizations. So perhaps taking these frameworks of discussions and placing them in the community-based organization framework, that equity lens, and bringing with us CHISPA and Unlimited Potential, hearing directly from them and what that approach could look like. So we hope you're able to join then. And then again, this is my contact information if needed. Just curious if Braden or Catherine have any other closing thoughts before giving you all back 5 minutes of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Brianne, for facilitating.